Good afternoon and welcome to another episode of Listen to Lisa. I am joined this afternoon by a familiar face to many Kansans for multiple decades now. Meteorologist Mike Smith, starting at KSN in the late 70s, continuing through the 80s, and leaving to continue with his private forecasting business that is weather data. And I am so proud to have my good friend Mike Smith joining us today. Hi, Mike. How you doing?
Great, Lisa. It's my pleasure to be with you and all of our listeners and viewers.
Now, I have to tell you, Mike, you retired a few years back. What have you been doing?
Well, I've been doing some meteorological consulting, but primarily my blog, which is the MikeSmithEnterprisesblog.com, where I cover real-time major storms and items of interest to people about weather.
Not only have you been doing the blog, but you're also quite active on social media. As I have said about you time and time again, even though you've stepped away from the Weather Center, you can never remove the meteorologist from the weather. You always continue to have your hand in it. I want to go back to Mike Smith when he was really, really young. And what got you into meteorology in the first place?
Well, I was 5 years old. There was an F5 tornado that went about a dozen blocks south of our home in South Kansas City. And I remember that night like it was yesterday. And then the next day, when my mother drove us through ground zero, and I saw the damage that an F5 tornado could do, very similar to the damage in Greensburg in 2007, I said to myself, even at the age of 5, whatever did this had to be pretty interesting. And I knew from that time on I wanted to be a meteorologist. And I've stayed interested in weather ever since. You're right, Lisa. Once the bug gets into your body, there's no cure.
And you also had that spirit of starting your own business when you were a small child. You were selling weather forecasts to your neighbors?
Yes, I did. My grandparents gave me a little toy printing press. I still have it. It's in my trophy case. And I went door to door trying to sell weather forecasts for a nickel. People thought I was absolutely insane. Don't you know the weather's free? They would ask. And to this day, there are people who still think all types of weather information should be free. And so I managed to build a career with Weather Data Incorporated of people who wanted to pay for an extra high class of weather information and storm warnings. But I got started at a very young age trying to sell weather forecasts, and that has stayed with me.
Now, going back to the 50s, there was a time in our weather history where it was forbidden for saying the word tornado or saying the word hurricane in a Weather Bureau briefing. And that started to change in the 1950s, and specifically during the Ruskin Heights tornado. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, actually, the banning of the word tornado occurred in the 1880s. There was an official with the Weather Bureau named Willis Moore who thought that more people would be killed in the panic of a tornado warning than would be killed by the tornado itself. Now, of course, that was preposterous, but that's what they thought at the time. And so the Weather Bureau forbade itself to use the word tornado as in a tornado warning. Now, in the early 1950s, the Weather Bureau began issuing tornado forecasts, which is the equivalent of a tornado watch today. However, for a tornado warning, that was still forbidden. And it wasn't until the Ruskin Heights tornado of May 20th, 1957, where the meteorologists with the Weather Bureau, Bob Babb and Joe Ogsley, issued a tornado warning for the Ruskin Heights tornado. They thought for sure they would be fired the next day, but they thought they had an obligation to their fellow citizens to warn them of what was coming. And there's no question that their warning of the Ruskin Heights tornado in 1957 saved lives.
Also, tell me what your family was doing. Your father having a dealership up in Kansas City, contacted
Right.
by the Raytown police chief to help
Right.
out.
Yeah. Yes. My dad's business, well known as Dick Smith Ford, but before that, it was Ray Smith Ford. Before my dad bought the business when my grandfather retired. And the police of Raytown called Dad and said, could we use any station wagons you have for ambulances? Because more than 1,000 people were injured in this tornado, and they needed every bit of transportation capacity that they could get. So my dad went out into the storm, which my mother pleaded with him not to do, because in those days we really didn't know where the tornado was. But after the tornado passed, Dad went out into the storm. He called all of his salespeople. They met at the dealership and they drove a dozen station wagons to the Ruskin Heights area to be used as makeshift ambulances.
Back in the 1950s, we had back to back to back major tornadoes that changed
Yeah.
a lot of things in the whole entire weather world. We had Udall in 1955, we had Ruskin Heights in 1957. 1958, there was something that was going on in Wichita that really started to change the landscape, that technology that we still use today, and that was Doppler
Yeah.
radar. We had an experimental Doppler radar that was on the southwest side of town, and we had the El Dorado tornado in 1958. And we were able to go back into the data afterwards and confirm just how strong that tornado was. Tell me a little bit about the relationship that you have had with radar in your career.
Oh boy, that's a long relationship. I started out at Channel 4 in Oklahoma City, and during the 5 years I was there, we had three different radars, each better than the next. And that was great experience. Then when I came to Channel 3 in 1975, we had an old converted aircraft radar that frankly wasn't very good. And the station management was very progressive and allowed me to purchase a WSR 74C radar, which was then the state of the art. We put it in Wichita in, let's see, that would have been April or May of 1975. Then 1 year later, my vision was finally fulfilled. I worked with a company out of Los Angeles, and we instituted the first ever color radar, where the colors represented the intensity of the storm. Plus, finally, we had maps everyone could see and understand. So we were really able to take a step up where people could instantly see the location and strength of storms. So we did two radars in Wichita. Then I went to St. Louis for 2 years. They had another type of radar, believe it or not. And then we came back to Wichita and began the era of the Doppler radar while I was on TV. And so it really has been a fascinating journey of all of these different types of radars. And since I retired from television, we also went with the dual polarization radar, which was another step forward. So my career really charts the era of change in weather radars. And as the National Weather Service looks to replace their current network of radars, something that really they're behind that they should have been doing sooner. But anyway, there's not going to be a whole lot of difference between the next generation of radars and what we have now because we made so much progress the last 50 years.
I also want to branch off when it comes to innovations in our field of weather. Take me back to June 8th, 1974. This was the day, and you were part of it in Oklahoma City, that changed
Right.
how we do tornado warnings on TV.
Yes, it did. What happened was we were predicting a major outbreak of tornadoes on Saturday, June 8th. When I say we, I'm referring to the WKY TV, the NBC affiliate in Oklahoma City where I was working. But there were certain unwritten rules in television at that time and in meteorology in general. And one of them was you don't try to forecast tornadoes for the next day or beyond. Those were referred to as, quote, hero forecasts, unquote. They were generally thought beyond the state of the art and shouldn't be done. But I was worried sick about what was going to happen the next day. And we had our sports director over for dinner that Friday evening, the night before. His name was Bob Berry, legendary sportscaster in Oklahoma City. And Bob and I were talking about this over dinner, and Bob said, "You know, Mike, if you're that convinced we're going to have tornadoes, I would tell the audience at 10 o'clock." So I did that. And so we informed the audience at 10 o'clock that the next day was going to be a dangerous day to really pay attention to the weather. Well, 3 a.m., my phone rang, more or less as expected, as the first round of severe thunderstorms went through Oklahoma City. So I dashed into the office because I was a weekend meteorologist at WKY, now Channel 4. And so I was at the station from roughly 3:15, 3:30 a.m. until about 10:30 a.m. Ran home, slept for about an hour, changed clothes, shaved, had a little lunch, went back to the station about noon, and at 12:30 the first tornado watch came out. And so we got the tornado watch on the air, but it looked like by 2 o'clock, a supercell that had the capability of producing a tornado was headed for Oklahoma City. So we went on the air with a tornado warning even before the National Weather Service put one out. It turned out that the ground clutter of their radar didn't allow them to see the approaching tornado. And in fact, we called the Weather Service and said, "You guys, you need to put out a tornado warning. The tornado's headed right for you." A few minutes later, they went out to see if they could see the tornado visually because they couldn't on radar. And they knew they were in trouble when the hangar came off the roof across the street from the National Weather Service office. So they put out a tornado warning, but they had to evacuate the office because of the fact that natural gas was leaking. So we sort of took over. We did our own tornado warnings. While tornadoes was not done that day, we were on the air nearly continuously. There were a total of 17 different tornadoes in the Oklahoma City viewing area. And our coverage, which included comprehensive coverage, I mean, what cities were in the path, not just what counties were in the path, but what cities were in the path, real-time reports of damage because we had a direct link that we had paid for with emergency management that the other stations in Oklahoma City chose not to pay for, and so they didn't have the information. And then finally, we put a TV camera out the back door, and we were able to broadcast a tornado live. Now, that was only the third time in history that a TV station had been able to do that. So the combination of the live telecast, the real-time reports of damage, the precision we were able to use, because our newest radar had only been installed for a month, and it was extremely precise. So the TV station got about 75 post letters complimenting us and thanking us for our coverage. There was an editorial in the Daily Oklahoman newspaper. There were letters to the editor about our coverage. And as you, Lisa, and any television meteorologist knows, there was and is an organization that is dominant in how TV news and weather is produced. And that company's called Frank Magid Associates. Well, in 1974, news consultancy was very young, and Mr. Magid was still very invested and working in the day-to-day part of the business. So the end of the week, remember the tornado was on Saturday. I don't remember if it was Thursday or Friday. A man in a very expensive suit came walking in along with the assistant general manager of the TV station, and his name was Lee Allen Smith. He said to me, Mike Smith, I want you to meet Mr. Frank Magid, and I want you to tell him about all that you did on Saturday. Well, I did that. And lo and behold, Magid started telling all of his client stations, look, the way to win the ratings race was with quality weather. Now, at that time, the dominant paradigm was comedians, puppets, and I hate to say this, but let's say the truth, big busted weather girls. Now, notice I'm saying weather girls, not meteorologists.
Yep,
They
because
weren't
there's a
like
difference.
yeah, they were completely different. They were there because of their beauty and their figure. They weren't there because they knew anything about weather. And they actually did a test in Minneapolis over color radar, and they thought color radar was too complicated for viewers to understand. Yet one of the competitive stations got one, and just like in other markets across America, within 6 months, every station in Minneapolis had one. Color radar spread across the country like crazy. The new paradigm of using radar with real meteorologists, with real radar, completely took out the era of the comedians and puppeteers doing TV weather. And really, that's the paradigm we use today. There are still a few comedians around, but for the most part, TV meteorologist is conducted by meteorologists with radar and the appropriate equipment. And we being the entire meteorological community, the National Weather Service, TV meteorologists like you, Lisa, and commercial weather companies like AccuWeather, that combination has managed to cut the death rate from tornadoes by an amazing 95%. As far as I'm concerned, that's a Nobel Prize winning accomplishment, but I don't think meteorology will ever get one.
I don't think it ever will either, because we hear it all the time. Oh, well, you can't forecast these snowfall totals.
Right.
You can't do this. You can't do that. And, snowfall totals as an example, I don't think any meteorologist will ever be able to win. I've been watching the nor'easter that's going on
Right.
during this broadcast, and I have an uncle that lives outside of Philadelphia. And he reached out to me yesterday and he said, Lisa, I am seeing snowfall totals anywhere from about 8 inches of snow to more than 20 inches of snow. Please tell me what it's going to be. And my cousin Laurel, she lives in Long Island, and then you have my uncle that lives outside of Philadelphia, drastically different for the snowfall
Right.
accumulations that they've seen. I think he may be closer to about 8 inches now, but when I talked to him earlier this morning, my cousin Laurel was above 21 inches of snow. And I think that forecast that I gave him was pretty accurate, and he gave me kudos for that. But a lot of times people will come back out and say, no, you weren't accurate. I think that is just an outdated phrase that continues to get slammed onto meteorologists to this day.
There are a lot of people who get some sort of weird pleasure from inaccurately criticizing others. I've never understood it, but I think a lot of credit goes to the National Weather Service and to the meteorological community on this blizzard. Hyannisport, Massachusetts, a couple of hours ago, before we were beginning the recording of this, had a wind gust of 83 miles an hour, along with 2 inches an hour rate of falling snow. Now, it's frankly very difficult to measure how much snow actually fell in those conditions because of the drifting. You'll get some areas that maybe had 3, 4, 5, 6 inches, and others that had 4 feet. I saw one drift measured at 4 feet a little while ago. So it's tough to tell exactly how much fell, but we were able to give a good 2 or 3 days specific warning. Now, we were talking about a week in advance that the blizzard was a possibility, but we were able to give about 3 days of specific warning. And that's a great accomplishment, and I guarantee you it saved lives.
Also, I look back to April 29th, 2022, and that was a pretty good forecast multiple days in advance.
Yes.
That was the
Yes.
Southeast Wichita Andover tornado.
Right.
And I remember on Monday of that week, us telling people Friday is the day to be weather aware, but
Right.
still people become complacent. In all the years that you've been in the weather world, do you think that we'll ever be able to overcome that, or is that just human nature?
I think it's human nature, although I would like to think that my grandchildren's generation, and my grandchildren range in age from 5 to 12. I would like to think that by the time they're adults, they're going to be pretty weather savvy. They're not going to go around with this ridiculous, you forecast 4 to 8 inches, we only got four, therefore you were wrong. I mean, it was within the range. What do you want?
Right.
I think they're not going to start from the meteorologist is wrong, prove me wrong, the person saying that. I just think I just think some of this foolishness will go away over time. But it is tough. Uh, you'll be in an elevator and people will say, boy, those weather people never get it right. And you don't even know what's precipitating that comment. And you wonder, gee, should I say anything or should I just let it go? Usually I let it go, but it is odd.
It is. We always try to defend ourselves, and we defend ourselves with facts too. But also, I would have to say, I think that maybe your grandkids, I know your kids are much more weather savvy because of their dad and also their grandpa too, who has had such a legacy from Oklahoma City to St. Louis and especially here in Wichita. And I hear it all the time. People that say, yeah, I remember Mike Smith. How is Mike Smith doing?
Thank you.
As we start to wrap up this podcast, what do you want to be remembered for?
Oh, I hadn't thought of that. As a good husband, good father, good grandfather, a person who used hopefully the best of science to attain um, real results for people that save their lives and save their property. Um, I have never given that any real thought, but I think that using the best of science and applying it to real world problems would be the best way to be remembered. For on the Weather Data Incorporated side, the commercial weather company that I started, we had a railroad in Mexico as a client. We told them that a flash flood was likely to occur in an area of Mexico called the Copper River Canyon. They have a passenger train that goes through there, actually, two passenger trains that go through there every day. They stopped the train, put people on buses, went out and inspected the tracks, and found they were washed out in 7 places. And if the train had been allowed to proceed, it would have plunged into the canyon, perhaps killing 300 people. And that's the number that came from the railroad. Having a career that enabled 300 people at a time to be saved while supporting your family in a nice way. You don't ever get super rich in this profession, but you're able to support your family well. That's a pretty good way to spend your professional life.
And I know at your core, Mike, you are such a big family man. You've been married to Kathleen for a long time. You have wonderful
Beyond
kids.
50 years.
50 years. How has she been able to support you and to balance this career? Because, like you said, you would get an hour of sleep here, you would be back into the weather office. I mean, that takes a rather strong woman and a strong family in order to support you in everything that you have done to keep people safe.
Kathleen is the absolute best. The smartest thing I ever did in my entire life was marry Kathleen. She is a saint. She is beautiful inside and outside. She has supported me 110% throughout my life. Uh, she brought up 3 terrific kids, and yes, of course, I was involved with them on weekends and evenings and things like that. But she had, of necessity, because of the number of hours I had to work, especially in the spring storm season, she was primarily responsible to bring up the kids and take them to basketball practice or baseball practice or drama rehearsals. She's the best ever.
Now, I have to ask you, Mike, where we're going in not only broadcasting. Broadcasting has changed quite a bit since the time that you were on air. We have so much digital, we have so much streaming. We're doing a podcast together. When you look at all of these different ways that people are getting information, what advice would you give to a viewer about where they should get their weather information from?
Well, I'm not saying this because Lisa is interviewing me right now, but Lisa's absolutely terrific. She is a great severe weather meteorologist. You want to make sure you get your storm information from Lisa. That said, the other meteorologists in Wichita are quite good as well. Wichita is blessed to have three really good meteorologists. That said, I think we're moving toward a time, and I think it's maybe only 5 years away, where you're going to be able to get a really specific storm warning, perhaps on your phone or on your digital watch, that will be even more precise than the ones you're able to get now. So that you know you've got to get to the basement or you've got to get to a bathroom in the middle part of the house when there's a tornado threatening. But fewer people will be told to take shelter because they're truly not in the path of the storm. I think that would be a good step forward. People always feel, for lack of a better word, somewhat foolish after they've gone to the basement and nothing happens. Now, there's no reason to feel foolish, but a lot of people feel that way. I've talked to a number of people who do. I don't want people to feel foolish. I want them to go to the basement when there's a genuine threat, but I'd like to, as much as possible, not inconvenience them in that way if the tornado is going to miss them by an appreciable distance.
I remember back to the early 90s, which you covering the April 26, 1991 tornado and seeing color radar at that time. Because I remember black and white radar when we had the 1980s. And I go back and I look at that coverage that you did of that day and coming from Hayesville, my hometown, being hit. And I think back, I'm like, Mike Smith called out this one storm report, and then I put two and two together. That was my dad's storm report from being an amateur radio storm spotter, talking about where it was located. And you were able to call it out just as you were tracking it. And now we can get right down to the street level
right,
with these radars. And we've made a lot of progress in all of these decades, from the way we communicate to the different things that we show. And I think that we will continue to get better.
I think so too. I think that we're in an area now where we have what's called mesoscale modeling. I hate that term because the public, what the heck is mesoscale? Let's call it this way: very fine scale computer modeling compared to what we had even 10 years ago. This field didn't even exist 10 years ago. So what we are able to do with new instrumentation, see, you've got to have, as you know, Lisa, very tight measurements in order to make very granular, very fine scale forecasts. Well, we're finally starting to get that instrumentation, and it wouldn't surprise me in about 5 years for us to be able to do more precise warnings of tornadoes and severe thunderstorms.
As we're wrapping things up here, Mike, any last thoughts?
No, it's just that I've been very blessed to have a terrific career and a terrific life. And another great part of what we've done is getting to know people like you, people who are very public spirit minded and want to save lives and do good for their communities and for society as a whole.
I remember how great you did covering the tornado, the first one that hit my hometown, and how I got a chance to meet you just a few weeks after that tornado. And it's like our paths crossed. What was that?
A tour of Channel 3.
It was a tour of Channel 3. And I remember the T-shirt that I had on, big old tornado on it, and it said, Toto, we're back in Kansas. But I think that was also the universe that was connecting both of our worlds. And I
Yes.
think it was pointing me in the direction, this is what you need to do. And who would have known that, decades later, that we would be good friends and
Yes.
that I would also consider you as a mentor.
I appreciate that.
All right, Mike. Well, thank you so much for joining us on this episode of Listen to Lisa. We wish you the best. And I know everybody here in the Kansas area is looking forward to this podcast and seeing you and hearing from you again.
Thank you, Lisa. And thank you to all of our friends and viewers. Getting to know you over all of these years has been a great treat.
All right, Mike Smith, entrepreneur, family man, and definitely a great meteorologist. Thank you again for joining us today. We'll see you next week on Listen to Lisa.
Bye-bye.